Well, good morning, and thank you for being here on this beautiful day. And I see some looks of surprises on some of your faces. I'd wager you weren't expecting a man to be speaking to you today. But I'm here but never fear, my wife, Emily, will be with you shortly. I'm here today with my wife because I'm one of the many men in the area who have helped promote women's suffrage, and alongside the countless women who help fight for their right to vote. Emily's brother, Henry, who was a New York State Assemblyman and a New York State Senator, was also instrumental in women's suffrage. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you my wife, Emily.
Hi. What a lovely place. And it's so wonderful to see so many of you here to learn about our life and work. My name is Caroline Emily Brereton Nordstrom, and I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania on June 11th, 1863. I married Carl Erikson Jonas Nordstrom, and we lived further up north in Diamond Point in Bolton. We lived in a beautiful home called Trottelia Farm, and we really are so excited to be here today. You see, upon my passing in 1934, I was laid to rest not here, but in Bolton Cemetery. Now, the fight for women's suffrage was long, difficult, and occasionally dangerous. In 1848, the Women's Rights Convention in Seneca Falls, New York, really brought the cause of women's suffrage to the nation's attention. And oftentimes, we faced violent crowds. And sometimes even the police would join in that violence, or they would refuse to come to our aid. Now, our fight for women's suffrage culminated in a vote that took place in November of 1917. And we were all on pins and needles as we anticipated the outcome. My husband was the chairman of the Men's League of the New York State Suffrage Association. Do you remember the excitement leading up to it?
Oh, indeed I do. The Warren County Committee for Women's Suffrage was as spirited as anywhere else in the country. Well, but I do remember that there was bad weather leading up into that last week. It made it difficult to have all of our speaking engagements and rallies across Warren County. But the weather cleared up and we were able to move forward with our rallies. On November 1st, I held a meeting up in Warrensburg, and the very next day another meeting in North Creek, where many prominent men who took up the cause spoke. Most notably, the Reverend John Coffey, who was pastor of the First Presbyterian Church right down the road here in Glens Falls, and Elmer West, the vice president of the Adirondack Electrical Power Corporation. We held these rallies and meetings all throughout the week, and on the day of the vote, myself and others, we promoted everyone to go out and vote if they could. And we thanked everyone for their hard work.
And we were so pleased with the outcome. We even held a victory luncheon on December 6th of 1917.
Oh, well, the luncheon was to honor you, my dear. Mrs. West, the leader of the Glens Falls group, said, "We have all done a little," but she, meaning Emily, has been the force back us all and has pushed us toward success.
Thank you, dear. And yes, there were so many of us that worked so hard to secure that outcome, and the fight for women's suffrage was so important. But there were other pressing matters that did require our attention. Earlier that year in 1917, the United States had declared war on Germany. And in 1918, we started sending our soldiers to fight. Now, with our boys away from home, President Woodrow Wilson understood that women were going to have to carry a heavier burden. So he authorized the Women's Committee to act in connection with the Council for Defense. Now, the task of this committee was to organize the various women's organizations in order to simplify national patriotic work. In fact, the president of the New York State Federation of Women's Clubs appointed me temporary chairwoman, and he authorized me to call a conference of all of the presidents of the various women's clubs throughout Warren County so that we could work together. And myself and the other chairwomen led many campaigns for the national good. Now, I wrote about one of these campaigns in a letter that was dated March 18th of 1918. And I sent this letter to the women of Warren County regarding the Women's Overseas Hospital in France. Now, at this point in the war, the people of France were truly suffering. So much so that when we talked about the horrors that they faced, we referred to it as bleeding France. It was important to me that the people of Warren County understood that while we were living in safety and comfort, the people of France were living in desolation and that they needed our help. After all, these same French women, especially the mothers of the brave French soldiers, they may be called upon to offer comfort and aid to our own sons. And so I noted in my letter that any contribution that they could offer, whether nickels, pennies, dimes, anything, would be appreciated to help with this cause.
Well, as always, the lead up to our Independence Day celebrations were filled with excitement and filled with the promise of our freedom after the war. What made it even more remarkable was June 23rd, 1918 was the first time in this area that each county was responsible for their own celebrations for Independence Day. Each county was head up and we had community sing-alongs and patriotic plays and well-known speakers and a reading of a letter from our own president, Woodrow Wilson.
Yes, the men and women of my time worked tirelessly to secure women's suffrage. And we also worked very hard to help our allies in France and our other allies during the Great War. We Americans, we understood that we have rights as Americans, but that we also have responsibilities. And so that's why whatever wrongs, whatever causes you may see, whatever issues there are in this world, what other wrongs need addressing, please accept your privilege and vote. Accept your responsibility to do whatever you have the power and the means to do, and then do it. Thank you.